Thank you all very much for coming. I think this is the second year that we have the College of Arts and Sciences distinguished lecture series, and as some of you know, the way I like to organize this is that one semester we celebrate an we invite an Ohio University faculty member to speak, and then in the other semester we have someone from across the country. And so in the fall, I'd like to have someone from Ohio University speak, and I'd like to open this up instead of just like using my own ego and choosing somebody. I'd like to invite you to suggest names to me. So if you have thoughts about whom we have speak in the fall, I'd be delighted to hear them. This spring, because of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, I was sort of thinking it would be really nice to invite someone who had something to say about that. And while we're on that topic, I do want to promote something that I've promoted to some of you, but in the fall, we're having this amazing conference organized by Mariana Dantes in her role as director of the Central Region Humanities Center, a whole conference on the Declaration of Independence, and I hope you'll watch for that when it comes. It's going to be really great. While I was trying to think about that, I came across an amazing essay written by our speaker today, and I thought this is someone I'd really like to meet personally, and I'd really like to see what he has to say. And so our speaker today is Vincent Phillip Muñoz, who is the Tocqueville Professor of Political Science and Concurrent Professor of Law. Does that just mean you're also a professor of law? Is that what the concurrent means? You're at the same time?
It means I'm a professor of law, but don't get paid like one.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So concurrent in this case means not paid, which that's excellent. That's a very good use of the word concurrent at Notre Dame. And he's also the founding director of Notre Dame's Center for Citizenship and Constitutional Government. Dr. Muñoz writes and teaches across the fields of constitutional law, American politics and political philosophy, with a focus on religious liberty and the American founding. He won a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship to support his most recent book, Religious Liberty and the American Founding, Natural Rights and the Original Meanings of the First Amendment Religion Clauses, published by the University of Chicago Press. Articles related to the project have appeared in American Political Science Review, the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy, the Notre Dame Law Review, American Political Thought, and the University of Pennsylvania's Journal of Constitutional Law. Dr. Muñoz's first book, God and the Founders, Madison, Washington, and Jefferson, won the Hubert Morkin Award from the American Political Science Association for the best publication on religion and politics in 2009 and 2010. His First Amendment Church-State Case Reader, Religious Liberty and the American Supreme Court, The Essential Cases and Documents, was first published in 2013 and is being used at Notre Dame and other leading universities. In 2019, he joined the editorial team of American Constitutional Law, the leading constitutional law case books designed for undergraduate instruction. His scholarship has been cited by numerous times in church-state Supreme Court opinions, most recently by Justice Alito, and by both Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Thomas in Espinoza versus Montana in 2020. Dr. Muñoz is a noted expert on the political philosophy of the American founding, and in particular James Madison. His most recent publications have explored the founders' understanding of religious establishments and, with his former student Kate Hardiman Rhodes, how the modern Supreme Court has reconceived what an establishment of religion is. An award-winning teacher and a popular lecturer, Dr. Muñoz has spoken at over 100 colleges and universities in the past several years. And he received his BA at Claremont McKenna College, his MA at Boston College, and his PhD at Claremont Graduate School. And I want to say about this, right, this is really admirable because he's one of those folks who spent a fair amount of time in his educational journey on the coasts, and now he's at a Midwestern university, which I personally really admire. And I also want to say that I'm grateful. So I invited Dr. Muñoz because I really wanted to hear what he had to say, but I'm really grateful to Court Rodette and the George Washington Forum for agreeing to co-sponsor this lecture. So welcome to Ohio University.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it. Well, good afternoon. Did I get this on? Can you hear me okay?
It's good.
Okay, good. I'm delighted to be here. It's my first time to Ohio University. I flew into Columbus just a few hours ago, and as I was driving down, I just felt like this is America. It really, and I just learned, I didn't realize how old the university is, and it actually dates, the founders date to the Revolutionary War, so it's just an honor for me to be here. I'm very much familiar with the George Washington Forum, and I run something similar, and from time to time I look at the George Washington Forum website, basically to steal ideas. So you guys are doing, you have something very special here, and just a delightful conversation with the dean, and I'm just really happy to be here. I fear that the lasting takeaway from my talk, and I want to apologize to the faculty, is that you're all going to become concurrent faculty members now by the dean. So I'm sorry. Yeah. All right. Today, not everyone is eager to celebrate the Declaration of Independence. Many, especially on the left, have been skeptical of the Founding Fathers in 1776. And the critique is familiar. All men are created equal didn't really mean all. The Constitution did not include African Americans or women. The founders' commitment to the rights of man was not a commitment to all human beings. But a different criticism, and one I want to focus on in my talk today, has emerged recently in what's called the post-liberal right. I don't know, is that term post-liberalism familiar to you? Maybe to some of you. Liberalism has failed because liberalism succeeded, writes my friend and colleague Patrick Deneen at Notre Dame. About natural rights, Alistair McIntyre recently passed away, probably Notre Dame's most famous professor, distinguished philosophy professor. Alistair McIntyre, in his famous book After Virtue, writes, I'm quoting here, "The truth is plain," he's talking about natural rights, "the truth is plain, there are no such rights, and belief in them is one with belief in witches and unicorns." The argument of the post-liberals is that the political philosophy of the American founding erodes traditional morality, it undermines sound religious belief, and it erodes what is good and noble in Western civilization. Viktor Orban in Hungary is a noted post-liberal politician. I think the left is wrong about the Declaration, but I think the post-liberal right is wrong about the founding. And I'm going to focus my comments here on what I think the post-liberals get wrong. Happy to talk about anything you want to talk about. Okay, here's my thesis. The American founding was animated by a revolution in political thinking, but a revolution that's not hostile to religion or religious truth. The natural rights political philosophy of the American founding, which I believe which includes all human beings, black as well as white, men as well as women, places limits on political authority in recognition of and out of deference to legitimate religious authority. This is my thesis. I'm going to try to lay out my evidence, and again, I welcome your feedback and certainly your challenges. I hope this is more of a conversation. Okay. In the Declaration and the founding era documents, I think we see three revolutions, and I'm going to try to organize my talk around these three revolutions. The first is that the founders instituted a new understanding of the foundations of political authority, one based on consent, consent itself is based on human equality. Secondly, the founders advanced a new understanding of the purposes of government, one where the aim of government is to pursue the common good or the public good in the founders' language. And the public good begins with the protection of individual natural rights. Now, I don't think those two revolutions are too controversial. The third one perhaps is, and that's that the founders limited the role of government or the role of the state out of recognition of religious truth and the legitimacy of religious authority. I'm going to try to show, in the spirit of Tocqueville, that properly understood, that the American founding was animated both by the spirit of liberty and the spirit of religion, a philosophical and practical achievement worth understanding and articulating, criticizing and discussing, but worth our attention today. Okay, so that's what we're going to try to do. I'll try to speak for about half hour maybe, and then again, welcome your questions. Okay, the first revolution is 1776. On the foundations of political authority. America, of course, begins with the self-evident truth that all men are created equal. But equal in what respects? And how do we know? What is the significance and meaning of that equality? Thomas Jefferson himself explained the meaning of equality a few days before he died. Do you know the story of Jefferson's death? Jefferson and John Adams died on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And there's a, if you're interested, there's an interesting story to tell about their death, but let me pass that for now. The nation was celebrating the 50th anniversary, and they wrote to Jefferson. Roger Waitman, who's the mayor of Washington, D.C., writes to Thomas Jefferson and invites him to the celebration. No, not unlike our celebration today, though you get me, not Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson wrote back. Now he's about to die. And so he writes back on June 24, 1826, just a few days before he dies, this letter, and it has this passage. And in it, Jefferson is writing not only to Roger Waitman, he's writing to all the Americans who will celebrate the 50th anniversary. He's Thomas Jefferson. He's writing to us. And this is what Jefferson says about the Declaration. He says, "May it be to the world what I believe it will be, to some parts sooner, others later, but finally to all, the signal of arousing men to burst their chains, to assume the blessings and security of self-government. All eyes are opening to the rights of man. The general spread of the light of science has already laid open to every view the palpable truth, truth you can touch, the palpable truth that the mass of mankind have not been born with saddles on their back, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God." Okay, to understand Jefferson here, we have to work through his metaphor, because horses are not born with saddles on their back either. But common sense tells us that it's legitimate for us to break a horse. What do we? It's an interesting choice of terms, right? What does it mean to break a horse? I don't know, so surely someone here has horses or grew up with horses. What does it mean when you break a horse? You tame it. What are you breaking? It's spirit, it's will. And why are you doing that? So we'll follow your will, right? So there's an order of nature, Jefferson is saying. You can disagree, but Jefferson is saying, between animals and human beings, right? Human beings are superior to animals. So you can legitimately put a saddle on a horse's back. If we follow his train of thought, no human being is to another human being like a human being is to an animal. All men are created equal means no one by nature, no man, no human being by nature is a master, and no human being by nature is a slave. The capacity of all human beings, being naturally endowed with reason, free will, and moral judgment, means we are all created equal. Now, of course, Jefferson didn't live up to this philosophy in his personal life, but that is the meaning of equality according to Thomas Jefferson. Given that all men and women of all colors, all races, equally share in the fundamental attributes of personhood, if we push Jefferson's metaphor to its logical conclusion, the Declaration's philosophical teaching about human equality necessarily includes the entire human race. Now, I don't want you to think this is just Thomas Jefferson. Founding Father James Wilson, since it's the beginning of baseball season, I'll say, and this is not altogether flattering, James Wilson is like a AAA founder. Like he was really good. He gave these lectures, the lectures on law. I'm sure some of the faculty know about them. If he only had a better editor, he would be well known today. I mean, these lectures go on and on. He meant to be the American Blackstone, and in some ways is. He's one of only 6 men to sign the Declaration and the Constitution, and he was extraordinarily influential in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, in the ratifying convention there. Okay. In these lectures on law, Wilson explains that the grounds of our natural equality lie in our nature as created by God. Nature has implanted in man the desire for his own happiness, Wilson writes. She being nature, she has inspired him with many tender affections towards others, especially in the near relations of life. So Wilson connects our desires for our own happiness and for ourselves and our loved ones to our natural impulses, as well as our intellectual and moral powers. And so what he does, what this quote shows, is he starts from human nature. And he says, given that we are constituted the way we are, we have a right of natural liberty. Every man, he says, has a sense of this right. Every man has a sense of the impropriety of restraining or interrupting it. Right? It's from human nature we understand. So Thomas Jefferson says we're all created equal. No one by nature is a slave. No one by nature is a master. That's to say we're all naturally free. Why are we naturally free? Because of human nature, Wilson explains. Okay. What does this freedom mean? Wilson is not a Hobbesian. And if you've read Hobbes, maybe you understand that. And if not, you should read Hobbes. But that is, Wilson says there's a natural moral law. I think maybe some of your students have read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And if you have, perhaps you've read the first 5 chapters where C.S. Lewis talks about the law of right and wrong. That's what Wilson means by the natural law, or the law of nature is the term the founders uses. And Wilson says the laws of nature are the measure and the rule. They ascertain the limits and extent of natural liberty. Wilson here articulates the founders' basic understanding of natural rights. All natural rights have natural limits. I want to emphasize this point because we misunderstand what the founders understood natural rights to be. We use the metaphor, rights are trumps. If you play cards, you know what that means, right? If I have a right to free speech, it means no one can stop me from speaking. But just a moment of reflection, we know that's not true. My right of free speech doesn't include libeling the dean, even though he's a dean, destroying his reputation. Everyone famously says, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Well, why not? Because that would cause a panic and people would hurt. And actually, that's true of all rights. You can't use your rights or employ your rights in ways that harm other people. The law of nature is just the law of reason. When Wilson says the law of nature is the measure and the rule, what he's saying is all natural rights are bounded by nature. The scope of the rights is bounded by the law of nature. That is, you don't have your natural right to free speech is a natural right to use your speech in a reasonable manner, not to lie about someone else. So rights aren't trumps in the way we tend to think. Rights, it turns out, are far more bounded. Okay. By nature, we all have the right to exercise dominion over our own lives, to make decisions on where to go to school or what to major in, or who to marry, or what profession to follow. But our natural right to liberty is bounded by the law of nature. We don't have a right to harm others. Given that no human being by nature has a right to rule others. And we're not talking about the relationship between parents and children. But we're all equal. We all have a right to exercise dominion over our own lives. Well, who gets to rule then? Who has authority? Given that we're all equal, the founders said, political authority, the right to rule, can only be instituted via consent. Consent follows from equality, right? So this is the first revolution. The idea that legitimate political authority requires the consent of the governed is the first revolution of 1776. The necessity of consent follows the self-evident truth that all human beings are created equal, that all possess a natural liberty to be responsible for their own lives. Well, the recognition of human equality and the corresponding principle that legitimate government arises via consent are in some sense modern political ideals. The founders derived them from classical metaphysical premises. Sorry, this is going to get a little technical, but in some ways among political scientists this will be the most controversial thing I say. So, the founders' reasoning presumes that human beings ought to be treated in accordance with the type of beings we are, which is perceptible in our unique attributes and capacities. The founders, I'm arguing, adopted Thomas Aquinas' ontology, that being and goodness are convertible terms, that human excellence is found by uncovering what we truly are. The founders, in other words, derived an ought, human beings ought to have the right to liberty, from an is, human beings have the capacity to exercise freedom. What most distinguishes the founders from classical thinkers is not a different approach to natural right or natural law, but the founders' embrace of human equality as part of the natural law. Okay. If that last paragraph didn't mean much to you, you'll go on and live a happy life. It's not a big deal. But there's an understanding of the founders that our natural rights are grounded simply on the passion of self-interest. And what I'm trying to show is that wasn't the founders' understanding. They had a much more elevated conception of natural rights. And that's why they also thought natural rights were by nature limited. Where this, I'm not going to develop this today, but to show you what's at stake here, it's take something like the Second Amendment and gun control. Your right to possess arms, your natural right to self-defense is limited by reason, by what's reasonable self-defense. And then who decides what's reasonable self-defense? Well, in a Republican government, the legislature. So regulations that are reasonable on what arms you can own and where you can own them wouldn't violate a natural law or natural right account of the Second Amendment. The founders are, the upshot of what I just said, if I were to draw this out, is the founders are much more Republican, meaning that the contours of rights are determined by the people, than they are libertarian. Right? So that's a different lecture, maybe for next time. Okay. Okay. Let me move on to the second revolution of 1776. Sorry, I've been turning around looking. I got a screen right here. Okay. As the right of natural liberty follows from our equal capacities to direct our own lives, the principle of consent follows from human equality. That's what we just talked about. But consent alone is insufficient for legitimate government. Consent is a necessary condition for political legitimacy, but legitimate political authority must be directed towards the ends or purposes for which government is instituted. The primary end of good government, according to the Declaration, is to secure the rights which individuals have been endowed with by their Creator. So a good government may do more than secure our rights, but it cannot be considered good if it fails to secure our rights. The conviction that governments are instituted first and foremost to secure our natural rights is the second revolution of 1776. And here, these are quotes from a 1792 essay by James Madison titled Property. Madison writes, "Government is instituted to protect property of every sort." So by property, Madison doesn't mean, your watch or your material possessions. He does mean that. But he says anything you have a value in, you can have property in. So you can have value in your land, true, but you also have a property in your ideas. Most importantly, in your religious opinion, in your opinions and your religious opinions. A just government, he says, is one which impartially secures to each and every man whatever is his own. And that's what the founders meant by the aim of government is to secure property. It's not just material possessions. It's how they spoke about justice. You have certain things by nature that are your own, and a just government secures that. Okay, the founders' conception of government is thus different than that which took hold in the 20th century. And now here you might think of what I'm going to say, this shows the improvement we made to government in the 20th century, or perhaps you think it's not an improvement. I take no position on that. I'm just trying to explain the difference. Influential progressive thinkers such as Herbert Crowley, the magazine The New Republic today, still published. Crowley was the founder of The New Republic. Political leaders like Woodrow Wilson and FDR, they thought the founders' understanding of government was insufficient for an industrial world. Woodrow Wilson's campaign theme in 1912 was the new freedom. And I think it's an interesting term, the new freedom. Why do we need a new freedom? And his answer was because the old freedom is no longer sufficient. The old freedom was the understanding of the Declaration of Independence and limited government. And that was fine for that time, but now we have new threats to freedom. And what are the new threats to freedom? FDR is most clear about this, but it starts with Woodrow Wilson. The modern corporation, right? What we would call Wall Street, oligarchic power, right? Or what Occupy Wall Street would say, the rich. That's the new threat to human dignity and human freedom. So we need a new freedom for the new threats. So the founders of modern progressivism understood the role of government included the securing of the economic conditions that would allow individuals to be responsible for themselves. That a more equal material basis for freedom was necessary. That's a departure from the founders' understanding, I think. Again, I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying it is a departure. The founders held that the quintessential virtue of the individual is responsibility. Responsibility for oneself, for one's own loved ones, for one's community. Responsibility to use your natural freedom well. That is, it's not the government's responsibility to provide for you. Okay, let me transition to the third revolution. The most fundamental responsibility, according to founders, of individuals for themselves is that individuals, not the government, you as an individual are responsible for your own soul. That is, government is not responsible for saving citizens' souls. We take this limit, this is a separation of church and state, we take this limit for granted today, but it really truly was a revolution in political thinking at the time. All right. Political freedom and the proper limitation of the state's authority do not imply indifference to religion. And here, this is either why the dean invited me, either because he liked what he said or maybe because he wanted to criticize me. I'm not sure. Yeah, okay. So this is what I'm about to say here is maybe most original to me now, for good or bad. I mean, most faculty, when they do original things, you're like, they're thinking something that no one said before. And you should really think, well, maybe no one said it before for a reason, right? So take what you think. Okay. Political freedom and the proper limitations on the state's authority, I say, do not imply indifference to religion. Politics must remain limited because of the nature of religious truth and in recognition of the proper domain of religious authority. Here the founders, or at least my understanding of the founders, stands in stark contrast to those who say our politics or laws must be neutral towards religion or neutral towards any comprehensive conception of the good. Such neutrality is usually said to be a central tenet of liberalism and a prerequisite to any sensible church-state politics in times like our own of deep pluralism. This is Rawls's position. And what I'm saying is the founders were not Rawlsian. In fact, they rejected Rawls. So the founders, I'm about to try to show, stand in stark contrast to those who hold that the grounds of our rights are primarily our passions, especially our passion of self-preservation. They also stand opposed to those who say our rights are grounded on neutrality to or indifference towards religion. The founders actually started with a truth about religion. This is from the 1776 Virginia Declaration of Rights, Article 16, actually published before the Declaration in May 1776. And James Madison was very influential in this language. Article 16 of the Virginia Declaration of Rights says that religion, or the duty to which we owe the Creator in the manner of discharging it, can be directed only by reason and conviction, not force or violence. And this, the Declaration says, is a fundamental and undeniable truth. So religious freedom starts with a claim about truth. Indeed, a claim about religious truth. Well, Madison and the founders did not put it this way. This is my translation of their thought. We might say today that an omniscient God who created human beings with the capacity to adore him or even to love him would settle for nothing less than our full devotion. The full devotion, adoration, and love of which human beings are capable of can only be given freely. And thus freedom is a necessary prerequisite to true religious worship. That true religious worship must be freely offered and that it cannot be coerced is the fundamental philosophical and theological insight that animated the American founding, especially on matters of religious liberty and the separation of church and state. So I'm saying that there is a philosophical and theological, what used to be called natural theology, at the heart of the American experiment. For what it's worth, I mean, I'm at Notre Dame, it's a Catholic university. My Catholic friends accuse me of being Protestant at this point in the lecture. Let me go even further. The idea that worship must be given freely is an idea that itself presupposes that individuals have a relationship with the Creator that exists prior to and separate from the polity. That this idea is the foundation of modern republicanism. The center of my argument, again, let me repeat this, the American founding proceeds from the premise that individuals have religious obligations that transcend the polity, that these obligations are prior in both time and obligation to any civic obligations, and therefore the political association cannot be the comprehensive or final association in human life. In this way, the founders critiqued Aristotle and the claims Aristotle makes in the Politics. So I'm saying, earlier I said the founders were traditional natural law thinkers, but there's a real difference. from, I wouldn't say Aristotle's a natural law thing. They're classical, but they disagree with some of the classics. The foundation of natural rights, at least as articulated by the American founders, lies in our pre-political or trans-political religious obligations. The conception of such obligations, I believe, this conception of obligation, I believe, does not appear in classical political thought. In the ancient city, and here I'm following the French historian Fustel de Coulanges, who's a 19th century historian. He has a famous book called The Ancient City. In the ancient city, Fustel de Coulanges tells us there was no distinction between patriotism and piety. That is, to be a good citizen in the ancient republic, to be a good citizen was to be a pious citizen. Because all law is ultimately theological. The foundation of the laws in the ancient republic are the gods, the city's gods. The founders disagreed with that conception of political authority. This distinction between patriotism and piety was fundamental for the founders. Indeed, they believed that one could be a patriot in a polity, one could only be a patriot to a polity where the laws did not mandate a specific form of piety. Worship must be one's own. That is the foundation of the American experiment. Therefore, a legitimate government can only secure religious liberty, not religious truth for its citizens. Even though the idea of religious liberty itself is based on a natural theology or a natural understanding of truth. Okay. By restraining itself and by recognizing the by restraining itself and recognizing the limits of legitimate governmental authority, the state, the government, implicitly recognizes the distinct and superior authority of religion. The absence of laws mandating specific religious beliefs or exercises, the absence of laws dictating the religious education of the young, the absence of laws regulating churches in their religious capacities, these do not constitute a commitment to secularism, at least not if secularism is understood to be atheism, or presume that religion is opposed to reason. The founders' constitutionalism is instead grounded on a commitment to religious liberty, which itself is grounded upon a natural truth about religion that's accessible to human reason. And that natural truth is that true religious devotion must be freely given. So religious liberty and the separation of church and state religious liberty and the separation of church and state also recognize that political authorities as such possess no special insight or access to divine revelation. And here, this is to emphasize the contrast between American republicanism and ancient republicanism. As Madison emphasized in his 1785 Memorial and Remonstrance, we have no good reason to believe, in fact, we have many reasons not to believe, that those who possess political power are competent to judge religious truth. Those truths that lie beyond reason, matters, this is somewhat technical, but those truths that lie beyond reason, matters above the natural law that pertain exclusively to the divine law, those, again, matters above reason, but not contrary to reason, those matters are subject only to church authority. The limits of human wisdom limits political authority to temporal matters accessible to our prudential and principled judgments. Okay, I've said a lot. That was a mouthful. I should draw to a close here. It's all right. Because political authority does not possess the mandate of divine authority, it must be founded on principles accessible to human reason. Above all, the truth that human beings are created equal, and therefore that all legitimate government is instituted via consent. Do you see how the founders based their political thinking on human nature, which we can understand through empirical observation? These basic principles of political right, what I've called the three revolutions of 1776, ordain politics to the protection of our natural and inalienable rights, and recognize the authority of churches to do the divinely ordained work that they are called to do. So the separation of church and state is not an antagonism between church and state. Church and state have different domains of authority. This is the legacy for which the signers of the Declaration of Independence pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. We honor their legacy and accept our rightful patrimony by understanding these revolutionary principles. Principles that we may agree or disagree with. But that's the nation they bequeath to us. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I felt like I went on for a long time. I hope that wasn't too long. Yeah, please. I can repeat it too if it doesn't go on.
Curious, your last comment on there's no antagonism between church and state, but my mind goes to kind of our experience with kind of anti-Catholic bias in the early 20th century. It seems as though the church is a natural opposite power or opposing power to the state. They didn't have any anticipation or anything in mind that could develop, where if there is a kind of majority religious thought, like Judeo-Christian tradition of some sort, it's going to naturally lead to some sort of opposition. I don't know.
Yeah. So the question, if you didn't hear it, is I presented, I'm going to editorialize a little bit. I presented a very rosy picture of the harmony between church and state, the professor asked. But look at American history. We see lots of antagonism between church and state, whether it's anti-Catholicism of the 19th century or 20th century, even now. Or fights about church and state are at the center of the culture wars today. So how can I say that there's a harmony? There's a harmony as long as each institution, church and state, stay in their proper lane. Right? What I've emphasized today is that the proper lane of government is to secure religious liberty, right? And to leave to churches and to individuals authority over their own religious lives. You could say that one of the great questions, whatever the difference between ancient and modern political thinkers, I think almost all agree, is how do you moderate those who rule? Let me just step back for a second. So imagine you're designing a constitution and you want the wise and virtuous to rule. But who are the types of people that want to rule? I mean, excluding the dean here present. Like, who are the type of people that want to become deans? Are they virtuous by nature? Usually the people who want to rule are ambitious. And many want to dominate. Those are the people who seek authority. So how do you moderate them? You could say that's one of the great questions of political philosophy. Because rule is attractive, and to dominate others appeals to a certain type of soul. So how do you moderate their ambitions? And the founder's solution was to say that those who govern politically, that is, those who control the guns, the armed forces, those who can put you in jail, they don't have authority over religious truth. In fact, the truth of religion is you can't be saved through political laws. And it has the effect of moderating political authorities if they stay true to those principles. Right? So, I mean, who is the head of the Anglican Church? The King of England. So we had a revolution against the King of England. And the Anglican Church was the established church in the state of Virginia. And in fact, the most interesting, in a way, the fiercest battle about the separation of church and state was in Virginia from 1776 to 1786. Because it really was a revolution. We were saying that those who govern, that is, those who control the armed forces, do not have authority over your religious lives. And that is a great moderation of political authority. If that moderation can be maintained, you can conceivably have a harmony between church and state. Now, there's another part of the story, which it requires the church, too, to stay in its proper domain. Right? Doesn't mean churches can't say anything about moral issues of the day. But the most fundamental thing was that those who hold religious authority can't free citizens from their political loyalties. Right? Because if you say that, if you're a religious authority and say, no, our authority is superior to the civil sovereign, and we can tell the citizens when they don't have to follow the laws, that's extraordinarily destabilizing. So church authorities, too, have to stay in their proper lane. Now, that doesn't happen is the story of human history. But we're trying to articulate the philosophy that would allow for a harmony between church and state. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer. I'll try to be. There's a gentleman back here. Yeah. If it doesn't work, I can just repeat the question. Sure.
Take the microphone so we can sort of just
Yeah.
Okay, I think this works. This is a related question, I think. The connection between the Declaration and the Constitution. Did the founders believe that there needed to be a prerequisite to virtue for their system to work, or was the mere artifice of the Constitution and the government structure created, the ability to dissipate the corrupting influences and the urge to dominate? Was that enough for the government to work, or did you really need to have the right kind of people with the right kind of impulses toward virtue and religion for it to work at all?
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question. So the founders' political philosophy was not like modern economics, or it didn't share the same assumptions as Adam Smith's invisible hand. So, and not to simplify economics, but it's not that complicated, right? Private vice leads to public virtue. Why do you take all these economic risks? Well, because you can make a lot of money for doing it. So your acquisitiveness, which is not a virtue, leads you to do all sorts of things that actually benefit the public, right? Was that true in politics as well? Would we have a flourishing republic if individuals just looked out for themselves and had no public virtue or no virtue? And the founders' answer is no. Now, the founders were realistic, right? Think of Federalist 51. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Men are not angels, right? Nonetheless, the American people at least have to be a self-governing people. That is, they have to have enough virtue to govern themselves. Maybe a simple example from campus. I'm not sure if this is exactly parallel. I don't know. Do many of you, I assume some of you live in the dorms. And do you have to lock your doors in the dorms? Yeah, okay, so some people are saying no. I mean, can you walk around at night and feel safe? And if you can, and you're nodding your head, think about how much better life is here. If you don't have to be anxious about your property being stolen or your physical safety being endangered. I mean, one, it just increases your freedom, right? especially if the freedom of those who are not, physically strong, or, right? Like, you can just live much better if the community has enough virtue to respect one another's property, and right? And imagine what life would be like here if you constantly had to be on guard with pickpockets. It would just be different, right? And I think that's, in a way, the founders' answer to your question. Look, people are not going to be perfect. We need a system of law and justice and courts and all that. We need the separation of powers, because especially those who hold office are going to be ambitious. Yet if there's not sufficient virtue in the American people to respect one another's rights and to stand up to government when the government doesn't respect our rights, then Republican government by the people, is impossible. Now, I think they expected, where are these virtues going to be cultivated? Well, public schools, for sure. I mean, this university itself is part of that project. And Thomas Jefferson was the founder of public education in Virginia. So certainly the state and education has a large role to play. But primarily families. Like, we forget, we overlook the importance of the family to Republican government, because it's actually the family where we learn the virtue. I mean, just think of yourselves, like, to the extent you're a good person, where did you learn those virtues from? And it's probably your mother and father. I mean, probably your mother, but, right. And this is a great theme of Tocqueville. I mean, Tocqueville says American women are actually, and through the family, are actually the fundamental key to the success of American government. And the answer is because of your question, right? That we learn virtue through the families, and traditionally women govern the family, and therefore they govern society, and they make a free society possible. I'll repeat your question. It's, yeah.
So I think you tell a really interesting story about what the founders had in mind as the foundation and how government should work. So my question is, everyone else will just miss my lead up here. Yeah. But on your view, do you think this is still the correct way to view philosophically the foundations of good government, or would you take maybe a weaker position that religious liberty is still an important factor but could be founded in other ways?
Okay, so the preface, which you couldn't hear, was talking about the brilliance of the lecture and thanking me for coming. And it was, okay, the lecture is primarily historical in trying to present the founders' ideas, but what's my own evaluation? Fair enough? So my primary purpose is not to tell you my evaluation, but to set forth some ideas so you can make your own evaluations, or start to have a more informed opinion so you can make your own evaluations. I think the founders got many things right. I think we do have natural rights. I do think all human beings are created equal. Indeed, I think the truths of the Declaration are why we can criticize the Constitution and all of its imperfections. And it's an interesting question, could the founders have done better? And just if I can say one thing on that, I'm a big fan of Alexander Hamilton, and I actually haven't seen the musical, so, but he had a plan. So, I mean, Hamilton is just amazing. You know, he, maybe you know this now, but, you know, he was poor, you're not supposed to use this language anymore, but son of a bastard. You know, his father was dissolute and abandoned him. His mother was of loose morals. And he's just like in the West Indies. And there's a storm in the Bahamas. And I think he's 13 or 12. And the ship captain reads a newspaper article describing the storm. And he says, who wrote this? And it was this kid, Alexander Hamilton. And so the ship captain says, I got to bring this kid to New York. And he sends Hamilton to King's College, which is now Columbia. And I'm like, what was in that article? Like, he must have just been a genius. And so he goes from like, a 14-year-old nothing, of no family, certainly no wealth, nothing, to George Washington's right-hand man in a handful of years. Like, he's younger than you, and he's basically running the Revolutionary War. So during the Revolutionary War, Hamilton had a plan, and he writes to Washington, we have the letters, and he calls for Washington to arm regiments of black troops. And he talks about in this letter the strategic value, we need more troops. But he says, and this is not a direct quote, he says, the deeper reason I want this is the black man will win his freedom along with us and therefore be free. This was Hamilton's plan to end slavery. And it was right there. But they didn't do it. So you think, what could have been? Right? And ultimately, this is what happened with Lincoln. So in many ways, the founders, I think, provide us many good guidance and resources. But they're men too. Right?
Thank you.
Maybe one more question? There we go.
Sorry in advance, I don't have quite the way with words that everyone else seems to. Sorry if this is confusing. But with our country being clearly founded on a basis of Christianity, and with a right to religious freedom offering so much religious diversity in our country, when people draw their own interpretation of natural rights from their religion, how can a just government protect natural rights without endorsing one religion in particular?
Yeah, good. So the question is, how can the founders protect natural rights without endorsing a religion? So you said that the founding is based on Christianity. I think that's true in some ways, but not simply true. And the principles of the founding are based on a natural theology. And that natural theology is perfectly compatible with biblical religion, I think. So it's not untrue to say that the founders, many of the founders were Christian, though not all, and some certainly had interesting religious beliefs, maybe I'll put it that way. In a deep way, there's a consonance between Christianity and the founding, though, in this, which is the founders, what I tried to show is the founders start from nature, including human nature. They say, look at human beings, right? What are we? That's where they start. They said, look at human beings. And they say, well, we have passions, but we have reason, and some of them say, and we have a moral sense. They all agree. We have an ability to distinguish right from wrong. And the founders clearly held that there's an objective standard of right from wrong that's above human beings, right? That we have the ability to apprehend, and then we have the ability to shape our choices to live according to that natural moral law. Okay. I think that's all compatible with biblical religion. It's compatible with many religions. Here's the question, though. Why should you respect nature? So by nature, all human beings are equal. But why should we care about nature? Or you can even think it in ecological terms today, right? You could say, well, if we pollute, why? Who cares if we pollute? We can have more wealth, or we can do what we want, okay, so we pollute, so what? Why respect nature? Why respect the physical nature of our environment? Why respect the human nature And here, and this is the deep sense in which the founders resonate with Christianity, though I don't know that it's limited to Christianity, is because nature is ordered by a creator. And our happiness lies in living according to nature. Now, the reason why it's certainly compatible with biblical religion, but that's also compatible with what Aristotle and Plato say as well. And I think Cicero too. Right? So I'm not going to disagree with you. I think there's deep resonance between Christianity and the founding. But there's deep resonance with classical political thought, or a classical understanding of the human person and the founding as well. Okay. These questions have simply been wonderful. And thank you so much for letting me be part of your celebration of our 250th anniversary. Thank you very much.